and about the public perception of his presidency.
When you take a tour of the world, a lot of Americans email me with their fears that, you know, some days they wake up and it just feels to them like the end of the world is near, and you go from North Korea to Iran to Iraq to Afghanistan, and you look at how things have changed, how Americans are viewed overseas, if that is important to you. Do you have any moments of doubt that we fought the wrong war? That there's something wrong with the perception of America overseas?
Well, those are two different questions. Did we fight the wrong war? And absolutely, I have no doubt. The war came to our shores, remember that. We had a foreign policy that basically said, let's hope calm works. And we were attacked.
But those weren't Iraqis.
No, they weren't, no, I agree, they weren't Iraqis, nor did I ever say that Iraq ordered that attack, but they're a part of, Iraq is part of the struggle against the terrorists. Now, in terms of image, of course I worry about American image. We're great at TV, and yet we're getting crushed in the PR front. I personally do not believe Saddam Hussein picked up the phone and said to Al-Qaeda, attack America.
The folks who say you should have asked for some sort of sacrifice from all of us after 9/11, do they have a case looking back on it?
Americans are sacrificing. I mean, we are, you know, we pay a lot of taxes. Americans sacrificed when they, you know, when the economy went in the tank. Americans sacrificed when, you know, air travel was disrupted. The American taxpayers have paid a lot to help this nation recover. I think Americans have sacrificed.
Mr. President, I know how much you love deep psychological examinations of yourself. While you were at Kennebunkport this last weekend, people talked about your relationship with your dad. People mentioned that former President Clinton has been a guest at Kennebunkport more often in the last few years than you have been.
Yes.
And there was a lot of speculation. Your spokesman, Tony Snow, recently all but said it's because of the way your father chose to end the first Gulf War that bin Laden saw weakness enough to strike the United States. Is there a palpable tension when you get together with the former president who happens to be your father? A lot of the guys who work for him are not happy with your direction.
No, listen, my relationship is adoring son.
Do you talk shop?
Sometimes, yeah, of course we do, but that's a really interesting question. I mean, it's kind of conspiracy theory at its most rampant. My dad means the world to me as a loving dad. He gave me the greatest gift a father can give a child, which is unconditional love. And yeah, we go out and kind of float around there trying to catch some fish and chat and talk, but he understands what it means to be president. He understands oftentimes I have information that he doesn't have. And he also understands how difficult the world is today. And I explain my strategy to him. I explain exactly what I just explained to you down there about how I view the current tensions. And he takes it on board, and he leaves me with this thought: I love you, son.
If your administration ended today, would you be satisfied with the record thus far? Again, the view out there, I think if you asked 9 out of 10 presidential historians, high point, bullhorn in the rubble of the buildings that came down. Low point, we're standing on it. Is that fair?
You know, first of all, there's no such thing as short-term history as far as I'm concerned. I think that you can't judge a presidency based upon a moment's notice. I believe you have to take eventually my standing in history will be judged by people 30 or 40 years from now who will be able to take an objective look at whether the decisions I made led to peace and prosperity. You know, this is a job where you make decisions, and you do what you think is right, and you let people, but recognizing that people are going to say what's on their mind at the moment. But I read 3 histories of George Washington last year. The first president of the United States is still being analyzed by historians, which ought to say to this president and future presidents, do what you think is right, and eventually historians will figure out whether it made sense or not.
We always talk about what you're reading. As you know, there was a report that you have just read the works of a French philosopher. Can you tell us the backstory of Camus?
The backstory of the book?
Well, what led you to this?
I was in Crawford, and I said I was looking for a book to read, and Laura said you ought to try Camus. I also read 3 Shakespeares.
This is a change. You
No,
just
really?
years ago were
Wait a
reading the
minute.
life story of Joe DiMaggio by Richard Ben Kramer,
Which
if
is a good
memory
book.
serves. You've been on a Teddy Roosevelt reading kick. You and I
reading-
discussed the last
I'm
time we
reading
were
about
here.
the Battle of New Orleans right now. I've got an eclectic reading list. That was a couple of books ago. Look. The key for me is to keep expectations low.
Is that what everyone doesn't get?
You know, my life, here's the thing. The great thing about the presidency is you're totally exposed. And people spend a lot of time, people do making decisions, and hard decisions. People spend a lot of time not only analyzing decisions, they analyze the decision maker. I understand that. But a president must never let that get him off track.
You don't feel frustrated that we're getting something.
You have to do what you think. If we're getting something wrong, we change it.
How have you been read wrong?
I frankly don't pay that much attention to it. I don't want to hurt people's feelings.
You're still not watching television.
Brian Williams with the president. For continuing.
是没有好料了，夹断了。
Stand further 哈。呀，这以前那 stand 的还有。
找新的地方住了。
新的屋子。
你不会好，不会啊？
哦，骨头不会晒到光哦，它的年龄是这样的。
在那边看，你看婆婆拿起来。
哎呦，
开腹。
不要站太高。我也低有啲嘅，低個剪好嗬。
呢背係喺身軀冇了唔要啦。
低是黑啦。
你頭奶冰啊，熱頭奶冰。
The head part is there.
剛才那個 ring 呢？
看先。
Only one ring 嘅。
刮茶冇用喺度有啊，刮茶水水的。
會刮茶幫我啲啊嘛，有。
厚喺度有嘅。時間都夠冇？
好啊。
個
好啊。
會問拍喎，哦，喺個水嗰度啦，唔要緊啊，
係咪？個吸引。
我再買嘢嚇。
有吗？
有。
那個低咯。
沒有了啦，沒有。
低啦，好像有低了。
低拿出來了。
你要就留一顆下來咯。
買啦。我呢要嘅，啲嘢細啲。
嗰啲有點解？一叫我问你，那骨头你看到了没有？
看到了。
哦，好啊。会不会怕？
不会。
没有东西的哦。
啊，这个
啊，就是开坟墓就是这样开了，好。
爸爸，你知不知道呢？爸爸，我也是要看那个东西。我以为很可怕，但是不是？为什么剩下牙齿呢？
因为它其他的东西化掉了 ，decompose 而已啦 ，dissolve in the sand 而已。一乐。喂，
你試爸爸分。
Scary or not? Go and dig the bone. No 啊，next time you not scared already 啦。做的 bone 是剩下一点点而已啦，right？OK 啊。
我叫好了而已，我講你拿我。
OK，爸爸咧就睡。
現在。
好，我接。
悉尼下阵雨，15到19度。奥克兰。新加坡本地3天天气展望：星期4、星期5和星期6基本上在下午时分呢都会下雷阵雨。大致。
Number 对不？
是阿婆的骨头。
哎，手不要摸。这个的菜我给你。
Sable Island, it's about 40 kilometers long, pretty much the length of Manhattan, more or less. It's very narrow, it's about the width of Central Park. Now, there are about 300 horses on Sable Island, so imagine Manhattan with 300 people. To find those 300 people in Manhattan would be something. The origins of the horses are multiple. They come partly from shipwrecks, some of them being brought from the mainland. It's a mixture of so many different breeds. And the horses, as they exist, they don't have a specific name or a specific breed, other than just the sable horses. Gifts that are being offered on a plate, and I think that those gifts on some occasions are being offered just to you. You can of course choose to take advantage of those moments, or you can just experience that moment for your own self.
When you arrive for your ERP session, you will be greeted by Frank and Nate. You can play with Nate while your family talks with Frank and reads about the study.
Some of them are amazing.
It was great to see that Charlie was comfortable playing so that I was able to talk to Frank and read about the study.
Everybody wants to present their work
While
in
you
large
play,
form.
Nate will show you the caps that
My
you will
idea
wear
about
during the
presenting
study.
in large form had
They
a
are
purpose.
stretchy and
I've
have
been
lots
very
of little
close
holes
to
in them.
horses
He will show
on
you the
Sable
syringe
Island,
that
and
he
they
will
allow
use to help
themselves
him get the
to be
cap
very
ready.
close to me,
It looks
to
like
my
something that you
surprise.
might get a
I
shot
want to
with,
create
but
the
it's
same
not sharp
feeling
at all,
to the
and it
viewer
won't
that will
hurt
look at
you.
those photographs.
It's only used to put some
When a
sticky
horse
gel
comes
into the
that close
holes
to
in the
me,
cap.
the
You'll
horse
be
is
able to put a
gigantic.
cap on yourself
And I want to
and
create
play with
that
the
relationship
syringe.
with the viewer that
That
will
way,
never
you
be
will know exactly what will
on
happen
Sable
when
Island,
Nate puts the
with a
cap
viewer that
on
will
you.
never have a chance to
Nate
see
let
it.
him touch the
And
syringe
with
so he
someone
would know
perhaps
that it
has
wasn't
never
sharp
been
or
that close
scary.
to a horse.
It also helped prepare him for seeing it again later when it was his turn.
When playtime is done, you'll sit in a big
Perhaps
white chair
some of
and
that
pick out some cartoons
beauty
you'd like to
will
watch.
reveal
You'll get to
the
watch the first
compassion that we all
cartoon
have
while Nate
towards
gets you
the
ready for your
natural
cap.
habitat.
First,
With
you'll
that
have to clean
compassion,
around your
perhaps we'll be
eyes
able
and
to go
behind your
further
ears with a wet
and
cloth.
make sure that some places in this world are being left alone, untouched.
Next, he'll brush your hair
Just
and
like
measure
Sable
your
Island.
head to be sure exactly which cap will fit you best.
I hope the Sable Island horses will roam forever free.
When you
It was
arrive
nice
for
to
your
get to sit
ERP
right there with
session,
him so that I
you will
could
be
see what was
greeted by
going on
Frank
and be there
Nate.
if he needed anything.
You can play
Before
with
he
Nate
puts
while
the
your
cap on
family
your head,
talks with Frank
he'll put a
and
few
reads
wires
about
on
the
your
study
face
with some stickers.
It was great to see that Charlie was comfortable playing so that I was able to talk to Frank and read about the study.
While you play, Nate will show you the caps that you will wear during the study. They are stretchy and have lots of little holes in them. He will show you the syringe that he will
When
use
he's done
to
with
help
the
him
stickers,
get the cap
he'll put
ready.
the cap on your
It looks
head.
like something that you might get a
While
shot
we were putting
with, but
the
it's
cap on,
not
they
sharp
explained
at
the
all,
different
and
steps
it
so that
won't
nothing
hurt
came
you.
as a surprise.
It's only used to put some sticky gel into the holes in the cap. You'll be able to put a cap on yourself and play with the syringe. That way, you will know exactly what will happen when Nate puts the cap on you.
Nate let him touch the syringe so
Then,
he would know that it
using
wasn't
the
sharp or
syringe
scary.
he showed you during
it also helped
playtime,
prepare him for
he'll
seeing
put
it again
some
later
whole
when
gel
it was
in
his turn.
each one of the holes in the cap. When playtime is done, you'll sit in a big white chair and pick out some cartoons you'd like to watch. You'll get to watch the first
After there's
cartoon
gel in all of the
while Nate
holes,
gets you ready
you'll go
for
into
your
the
little
cap.
room to watch a video that you selected earlier. First, he'll have to clean around your eyes and behind your ears with a wet cloth. Next, he'll brush your hair and measure your head. You can ask your mom or dad to come with you into the little room if you'd like.
I got to go into the sound booth with him, which helped him feel relaxed. It was nice to get to sit right there with him so that I could see what was going on, but the room was calm and quiet. And we just sat and watched the
Before he
cartoons.
puts the cap on your head, inside
put
the
a
study
few wires
chamber,
on your
it's
face
dark
with some
and quiet, and you'll get to watch another cartoon. While you're watching this cartoon, it's important to be very still and very quiet. After you're done watching the cartoon, the cap and stickers will be
When he's
taken
done
off.
with
The stickers, he'll put the cap on your head.
While they were putting the cap on, they explained the different steps so that nothing came as a surprise. They took the cap and stickers off and told him what a great job he did.
When that's done, you'll get to play and have fun in the lab
Then,
spaceship. Using the syringe
Charlie
he showed
thought
you
all
during
the equipment
playtime,
was cool,
he'll
but
put
I think
some
his favorite
whole
part was
gel
getting
in
to
each
climb
one
into
of the
the
holes in the
spaceship at the
cap.
end. Thanks to their patience and care in explaining the process, it was a great experience.
After there's gel in all of the holes, you'll go into the little room to watch a video that you selected earlier. You can ask your mom or dad to come with you into the little room if you'd like.
I got to go into the sound booth with him, which helped him feel relaxed. I thought it would be hard to help him stay still, but the room was calm and quiet, and we just sat and watched the cartoons.
Inside the study chamber, it's dark and quiet, and you'll get to watch another cartoon. While you're watching this cartoon, it's important to be very still and very quiet. After you're done watching the cartoon, the cap and stickers will be taken off.
They took the cap and stickers off and told him what a great job he did.
When that's done, you'll get to play and have fun in the lab spaceship.
Charlie thought all the equipment was cool, but I think his favorite part was getting to climb into the spaceship at the end. Thanks to their patience and care in explaining the process, it was a great experience.
Unfortunately, the majority of our public do not welcome your...
Well, let's go back to the week that the accident began 3 years ago. When the cores melted down, the nuclear containments were really not designed for the temperature and the high radiation that they experienced. So what happened was all of the rubber seals that allow electric wires to go in and out and that allow the pipes to go in and out, all of those rubber seals failed. So even though the nuclear reactor core didn't melt through the concrete, what happened is that the groundwater is coming in through the holes in the walls. So for the last 3 years, there's been, as you said, 300 tons of water passing through that nuclear reactor and out into the Pacific every day. So the problem was in effect back a month after the nuclear accident occurred. And there were things they could have done back then. I recommended pumping down the groundwater, but between the pumps and the nuclear reactor having something called a zeolite trench. Zeolite is a really good material. It's volcanic that would capture all of the radioactive cesium and most of the other isotopes. Well, I was told 3 years ago that Tokyo Electric didn't have the money. Well, it's one of those pay me now or pay me later. Because they didn't keep that groundwater under control 3 years ago, now they're paying the price. So these typhoons come along and dump, as you said, 10 inches of rain, an enormous amount of rain in a very short time. And in addition to the 300 tons that's normally leaking in, now there's a lot more. So all of the trenches that connect different parts of the plant are now overflowing and leaking into the ground as well. You know, when you compare Fukushima to Chernobyl, the total release of radioactivity from Fukushima is worse than the total release from Chernobyl. Chernobyl may have released 20 or 30% more into the air, but this ongoing leak of radioactivity into the groundwater never happened at Chernobyl. So we've got the plant is continuing to bleed directly into the Pacific day in, day out, and whenever you get an excessive rainfall, essentially it pops an artery and flows even more hundreds of tons into the Pacific. And it's not a problem that's going to go away. After Chernobyl, a year after Chernobyl, they had pictures of the nuclear reactor core. And a year and a half after TMI, 3 Mile Island, they had pictures of the reactor core. Well, Fukushima is so radioactive, no one's gotten near it yet. We don't even know where this nuclear reactor core is, let alone try to stop it from leaking into the groundwater. It's a real mess. It could have been mitigated 3 years ago, but, they're saying the horse is out of the barn now and you're not going to get it back. Tokyo Electric was penny wise and pound foolish. There were chances to stop this in the first month, and they just didn't do it.
And we know, Arnie, that TEPCO has been pumping hundreds of tons of highly radioactive water to storage tanks on the site, and that's pumped from the area around the reactor cores, even though we don't know where they are, and from the area generally. Now, the Japanese have repeatedly warned they're running out of storage. Did they dump some of that water into the Pacific?
Well, they are running out of storage if you limit their storage space to the site. But right over the fence boundary is totally uninhabitable land, too. So if they really wanted to, they could extend these tank farms into land that's adjacent to the plant. Politically, they don't want to do that. They want to start dumping water as opposed to capturing water. The biggest problem, in my mind, with these tanks, there's two problems. First off, if there's another severe earthquake, a Richter 7, not the Richter 9 that was off the coast, but a Richter 7, all of these tanks are not seismically qualified. And they'll all fail and run down into the Pacific in mass, which would be an insult to the Pacific that has never occurred in the history of the world. So the first issue is they've got all these non-seismically qualified tanks that they're throwing up still at 2 a week. And those tanks then run the risk of failure in a seismic event. The second thing, though, what TEPCO is doing is they're attempting to clean the water in the tank with filters. And they've been reasonably successful. when they can do a tank, and there's so many tanks, there's still many they haven't gotten to, they can remove about 90% of the radiation from the tank. The radiation levels are still so high that if that tank were in any other country of the world, we certainly wouldn't think about releasing it into the Pacific. But considering how bad Fukushima is, the Japanese seem to consider that as, 90% is good enough. But the other half of that is that all of that radioactive material now is in filters, sitting in, like a Brita filter. When you take a Brita filter out of your sink, you can walk over your trash can and throw that Brita filter into the trash can. Well, the filters that TEPCO's using now contain all of that radiation that was in the water. And it's not just cesium. Cesium's bad enough. These filters are going to have to be stored for 300 years somewhere. But because the nuclear core is melted down, what we've got now is strontium, which is a really bad chemical. It's a bone seeker that causes all sorts of cancers, but also plutonium. The nuclear reactor has breached, and we're getting plutonium in the groundwater, which is now winding up in these filters. Well, plutonium stays radioactive for 250,000 years. And the Japanese are not being honest with their population. They're not telling them that, oh, by the way, in addition to these nuclear cores, whenever we find them, we've got thousands of filters that now have essentially pieces of the nuclear core in them that we're also going to have to store for 250,000 years. So by filtering the water, they've reduced the liquid problem, but they've created a huge solid radioactive waste problem that no one, you've got an exclusive here, Alex, and no one in the world is talking about where are they going to store all of these filters for 250,000 years.
250,000 years, no problem. We should be able to look after them that long. Wow. Well, the Japanese press tells us the operator, TEPCO, plans to remove that temporary outer shell from the #1 reactor. Is there a danger there?
Well, it increases the airborne radioactive releases. The reactor itself has been breached, and the reactor containment has been breached. Most of that breach is in the form of liquid radiation leaking out. But, there's holes in the side of this thing that are continuously releasing gaseous radioactivity. So when they put that tent over top, that white tent over top of the building, that building was called the reactor building. It was designed to catch all those gases. And I can't figure out why they're doing it. They're basically allowing the airborne radiation that gets out to float freely throughout Fukushima Prefecture again. It's nowhere near as bad as on the day of the accident, but if it were an operating plant anywhere in the world, the releases from that building would be called excessive, and the reactor would be shut down. Of course, at Fukushima, there's a different set of rules in place.
Well, it's been a few years now since the big accident. We've heard almost nothing about the impacts on people in that region. There are accounts coming out of there of strange tumors, kids dying, pets dying. What have you heard, and can we ever expect an honest accounting from Japanese authorities?
That's a pretty good summary, frankly. We continue to get information from people who live there about cancer rates and illnesses in general, not just cancer. We think of radiation as a cancer-causing thing, but it also causes many other ailments. Much higher incidences of a whole range of illnesses than they had in 2010, the year before the accident. We work with a woman who she has a garden. She's an organic gardener, and every year she's taken the seeds from her garden, planted, and then harvested seeds from those plants to be the next year's crop. So she's got 4 years now of seeds that have been growing about 30 miles from Fukushima. And she's beginning to experience gargantuism in her food now, which is an indication of radiation damage. It's one of the many DNA changes that occurs after a couple of generations. So we know that gardeners, and plants that are outside the exclusion zone are seeing the effects of chronic levels of radiation that the Japanese government would choose to ignore. We're also working with doctors in Japan, and some brave doctors are saying that they've been threatened, that their hospital rights have been threatened. If you tell your patient this illness is radiation related, you'll lose your right to practice and things like that. So there's an enormous pressure on the medical community to tell the patients that what they're experiencing is not at all related to radiation. But the key is statistics, and the question is, when will the statistics be released for mortality, morbidity, and general illnesses in Fukushima Prefecture? We're not seeing the data. The medical community now has to file every report that it writes with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, before it's issued. So if you're a hospital and you've got mortality data, you're not allowed to issue that to the public until those reports have been cleared by the IAEA. Well, Article 2 of the IAEA's charter is to promote nuclear power. So even if the hospital was conscientious, and of course there's a lot of political pressure not to be, but even if it was conscientious, there's another step in the process, and they've got to clear an IAEA hurdle before those numbers are released. It's truly frightening, the pressure that the medical community is undergoing in Japan, and very few of them are willing to tell the truth.
Reuters News Service reports that Japanese prosecutors are once again considering criminal charges against executives from Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO. Last year they said no charges, but a special citizens panel is forcing them to reconsider. And, TEPCO is almost an invincible insider. That's their reputation. It's legendary in Japan. Is there any chance that those who should have known about this or could have known about this will be exposed to justice?
It's not could have or should have. They did know about it. There's no doubt about the fact that Tokyo executives in Tokyo knew about the magnitude of the crisis and stymied effective information being provided to the people. I won't go as far as say that the plant staff was involved. The plant staff acted heroically. I hope when it gets to the point of any indictments that the members of the plant staff in a crisis situation were true heroes. But the people sitting on in their easy chairs in Tokyo knew of the magnitude of the problem, should have evacuated earlier, should have asked for assistance earlier, and should have alerted Prime Minister Khan earlier. I had a talk with Prime Minister Khan last year. He and I were speaking in New York and then the next day in Boston. And I said to him, knowing what he knew from the two people who were providing him information, Tokyo Electric and METI, the Industrial Ministry for Nuclear Reports, he was getting awful information. And as a policymaker, he could not have gotten the information to evacuate from either of them. And the guy's not a nuclear engineer. So he did the best he could with some really miserable information and actually forced Tokyo Electric not to abandon the site. I'm absolutely convinced, and I've met with him several times about this, that Tokyo Electric was going to pull the plug, get out of the site, and let a meltdown destroy Japan. I hope people go to jail, but I'm not confident in the Japanese legal system. Their lawyers are very progressive, but their judicial system, their judges are very conservative. And what happens, you'll have a brilliant case get throttled by very conservative judges. And I don't know that situation's going to get turned around anytime soon.
In another move, former Japanese ambassador Mitsui Murata says Japan should back out of the 2020 Olympics. He calls it an honorable retreat, and that's because inviting international guests to a Tokyo still radioactive from the Fukushima disaster is, quote, immoral and unethical. Arnie Gunderson, is Tokyo radioactive, and what are your thoughts about holding the Olympics there?
Yes, Tokyo is radioactive. And I've spoken to Ambassador Murata, and my problem is if we worry about the exposure to Olympic athletes who are going to be there for 3 weeks, what about the exposure to the people who live in Tokyo for the last 10 years, 9 years from 2011 till the 2020 Olympics. So I'm afraid it's a little bit elitist to worry about visiting athletes who are going to be there for 3 weeks when in fact 35 million people are exposed to this radiation for 9 years. Now, I think the government of Japan should be aggressively cleaning up Tokyo, but to do so would spread fear, and that in turn would stop the Olympics, which would then crush nuclear revival that the Abe regime is so desirable. It's so desirable to the Abe regime to get those nuclear plants running again. So I think, yes, Tokyo is contaminated, but my pity goes out to the 35 million people who live in it day to day, and the visiting athletes 6 years further on down the road are at low risk compared to the 35 million that have to live with it.
This is Radio EcoShock. I'm Alex Smith with nuclear expert Arnie Gunderson of fairwinds.com. And in just a minute, I'm going to ask you, Arnie, about the facts and rumors about Fukushima radiation reaching the west coast of North America. Then we'll get to your new work on what could be the American Fukushima, the risky Diablo Canyon nuclear reactors in California. But I don't want to leave Japan, Arnie, without this one glaring example of wishful thinking. Japanese regulators have ruled that there will be no volcanic eruption near Sendai nuclear plant during its last 30 years of operation. There was just a surprise eruption of Mount Ontake in central Japan this past September 27th. Expert volcanologists have protested nobody knows when volcanoes will go off. What does this sort of so-called planning tell us about the nuclear industry?
I think it's that general hubris that sets into the nuclear industry. Is that when you look at these plants, they're impressive pieces of concrete. And it must have been like standing on the dock watching the Titanic go out to sea. I mean, this was an impressive engineering feat. And we seem to forget the power of Mother Nature. I mean, tsunami wall was 4 meters, but history showed that tsunamis of the magnitude that hit Fukushima, 15-meter tsunamis, happened less than every 1,000 years. Well, the same thing holds for earthquakes and volcanoes. It's not like a volcano is going to pop up and 2 minutes before the plant has a chance to shut down, it's going to devour the plant. No one is suggesting that. But if the plant has to be abandoned, then you need to cool a nuclear reactor for 5 years because the radioactive material remains physically hot and radioactively hot for hundreds of years, but it remains physically hot for 5 years. So if a volcano were to erupt in the vicinity of the Sendai plants, the net effect wouldn't be the instantaneous failure of the plant, but it would result in abandoning the plant. And when you do that, you're unable to keep it cool. And you've got, Fukushima all over again.
Okay, let's move over to North America. Now, this spring of 2014, a citizen in British Columbia, Canada, found a sample of cesium-134 in a park, and it was inland from the ocean. What would that tell us?
We have samples from Vancouver that show cesium-134 and 137 in gardens in Vancouver. So it didn't surprise me that you're finding 134 in inland regions. Cesium-137 has a 30-year half-life. And if that's all you find, you can't determine whether or not it came from Fukushima or from atomic bomb testing 30 or 40 or 50 years sooner. But when 134 is present, it has a 2-year half-life. So 134 is the signature that it came from Fukushima Daiichi. And like I said, we found gardens in Vancouver that had both cesium-137 and 134, which is a clear signature of Fukushima radiation. We've seen that as far north as a little bit north of Vancouver, all the way down to Portland, Oregon. That area, we've seen contaminated ground samples that have both 134 and 137. So clearly the West Coast was nailed in March and April of 2011. I don't think it's new contamination. I don't think 134 and 137 are continuing to fall on Vancouver or British Columbia or Seattle for that matter. But what you're finding now is the residual radiation that came over in those first waves, the first 2 months after the accident. Where it's most concentrated, Alex, is in the benthic fish, the fish that thrive on the bottom of rivers and ponds. If people really wanted to know if there were radiation, and governments don't seem to want to know this, the place to look is catfish, because catfish are bottom dwellers, and on the upstream side of dams, they are in water that's been trapped. It's run out of the mountains and settles, so that sediment settles into the upstream side of dams. And if the British Columbia government really wanted to look, the right thing to do would be to do some core samples on the upstream side of dams or to capture some catfish. Catfish would show strontium in their bones. And that's also another indication of Fukushima radiation. I don't know of any government, Washington State, Oregon State, British Columbia, the city of Vancouver, I don't know of any government who's doing that kind of sampling. I don't think they really want to know the answer.
A Canadian research scientist named John Smith just told a meeting of the American Geophysical Union that his group has measured a radioactive plume from Fukushima in Canadian waters. Have you heard about that?
Yes. There's also another plume heading a little bit further south down the Oregon coast into California. Yes.
So when is the real radioactivity expected to hit the West Coast? Do we know?
The plume we are not at the peak. It's still coming. And it will continue to come as long as Fukushima continues to bleed into the Pacific. So we're seeing the beginning of this concentration gradient, this flow of radiation. But the real issue is we get asked all the time, should I swim in the Pacific? And if you're brave enough, because it's awfully cold, swimming in this water is not a problem. We've had people say, should I run along the beach because I might inhale the air? The inhalation of this is not the problem. The problem is that the fish that live in that water bioaccumulate that material. So, if there's, say, 10 becquerels per liter of cesium in the water, that's going to be what the fish then digest and concentrate. And then the little fish get eaten by the bigger fish and it works its way up the food chain. So the real issue is not swimming in the water, but it's eating the fish that are in the water. And I've made the personal decision not to eat fish from the Pacific anymore until I know the radiation concentration. What I expect of my government, and I expect of the Canadian government as well, to tell me what's in that fish. And then as an informed consumer, I can make a decision about whether or not I want to eat it or not. But when I hear these platitudes from the United States that it's below safe level, that's nice, but tell me the number. So as an informed consumer, I can make that decision. I don't want my government to make that decision for me.
But I can see the Chinese becoming majority owners of a British nuclear power plant, subject to British safety rules.
This is Radio EcoShock. I'm Alex Smith with nuclear expert Arnie Gunderson. Arnie, it's like there's a terrible contest going on to see which could be the next American Fukushima. Vermont Yankees always in the running. Indian Point outside of New York City could have the biggest impact on the most people, but the two California reactors, San Onofre and Diablo Canyon, are the big contenders in my opinion. We know San Onofre was shut down, but there's still 1,600 tons at least of highly radioactive waste sitting on that earthquake zone. Do you feel confident the San Onofre nuclear waste is being safely stored?
Not yet. And by the way, we think of earthquakes as something that happens in California, but the plant with the highest, what we call core damage frequency, is actually Indian Point. It's only a mile away from a Richter 7.5 earthquake fault that wasn't discovered until after it was built. So we could have an East Coast earthquake at Indian Point, which would be disastrous. But getting back to your question on San Onofre, if the material gets put into casks, the casks are much safer than the building they're in now. So my thought is the priority of officials should be to get that material out of the fuel pool and into casks as quickly as possible. The casks at Fukushima survived the earthquake and the tsunami just fine. It was the fuel pools that didn't. So until San Onofre, the fuel in the fuel pool is completely empty and it's in dry casks, then we still have a serious problem. Now, the choice of dry cask, there are better dry casks than they're presently using, but still in comparison to keeping that radiation in the fuel pool, wherever they put it in dry casks is better than where it is right now.
Okay, now the Diablo Canyon nuclear reactor, what are the multiple risks there in that double reactor complex right on the California coast?
Yeah, Diablo Canyon is in my mind, the most dangerous reactor in the United States. It was known when they built the plant that a Richter earthquake with ground accelerations of 0.4 G, 4/10 the acceleration of gravity, could hit the plant. And that's why they built it. Well, as they were building it, they discovered other earthquake faults that were much nearer to the plant that could double that to 0.75 G. And they didn't change the plant. They just changed the numerical analysis to make the plant fit an earthquake that was twice as severe. And what we found, Fairwinds just produced a report that we sent to the NRC. And the big thing they're ignoring is not the gross collapse of the building in the event of a Richter 0.7 G earthquake. It's something called instrument chatter. And it's really not spoken about very often in nuclear circles, but hopefully Fairwinds can bring it to the forefront. You have switches on the wall that turn a light on. Well, they have switches in nuclear plants too. We call them relays. And if the ground shakes, the relay turns on and off without any human intervention. Now, we found an NRC report that shows that the NRC has said there's 100% probability that in the event of an earthquake, some of those relays are going to wind up in the wrong position. So if you want a pump to be on, the relay is going to be off. If you want a pump to be off, the relay is going to be on. Because this relay chatter will cause them to bounce back and forth. And at the end of the earthquake, they won't be in the right position. And it's a really serious problem and has been unanalyzed at Diablo Canyon. In my opinion, Diablo Canyon should be shut down until they analyze that problem. But of course, that would be a 4 or 5 year effort, and they may as well throw in the towel. So they are choosing to ignore the problem rather than really analyze this relay chatter issue.
Well, this is the first I've heard of this. I guess we can say we're breaking this on Radio EcoShock.
You are. It's it's in the deep bowels of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's files, but they don't want to talk about it either. People who work with relays have seen them buzz. We'll be posting a video in the next couple of weeks about relay chatter, and they routinely will buzz when they're not working right. When the springs are worn and tired, they'll sit there and go blah. Well, in the event of an earthquake, that will happen anyway, even if it's a brand new relay, because they'll just bounce. And the switches will turn on and off and on and off and on and off. And then when the earthquake ends, there's no guarantee they'll be where you want them to be.
And then we have David Lochbaum. He's a nuclear expert from the Union of Concerned Scientists. He says Diablo Canyon has never met the basic requirements for fire protection. Now, how can the NRC allow this nuclear plant to keep operating?
Well, it's happening in Region 4 of the NRC, and to my mind, Region 4 is the most industry-friendly region in the country. Region 4 covers California, but all the way out essentially to the Mississippi River. We had Fort Calhoun, which was the plant that was surrounded by the Missouri River. That was a Region 4 reactor. We had San Onofre, which had gross failures of its steam generator, and if we let it to the NRC, they would have started that plant back up. And were it not for Friends of the Earth and the Fairwinds report that went with that, San Onofre would be running with damaged steam generators today. The NRC in Region 4 has never seen a nuclear reactor it doesn't like. And now, of course, you've got Diablo Canyon with miserable fire protection designed for an earthquake half the size as what geologists know it will encounter. And yet the Nuclear Regulatory Commission continues to let it run. The concept is called grandfathering. And basically they say once you've got your license, we're not going to take it away. You've been grandfathered in. If we find anything new, we won't make it apply to you. That's what's happened. The NRC has said, well, it was what was good in 1960 when this plant was designed is fine for it to continue to operate all the way until 2045 if Diablo Canyon has its way.
You can see the same thing happening in Japan about the height of the tsunami wall that they had there, you know. Well, that's the height you build it, so we'll just let you keep operating. Now, this new report, is it going to be available online, and who did you do it with?
Yeah, we published I think it's about a 45-page expert report that was sent to the NRC a week and a half ago with a legal filing that was sponsored by Friends of the Earth. Basically, we determined that Diablo Canyon never should have been allowed to run because it violated a federal law. It's called 10 CFR 50. That's nuclear law, and it's Part 5059, which basically says that when you know a plant has problems and you change your analytical approach to solve that problem, the public has a right to know it. That didn't happen at Diablo Canyon. The public was not informed that Pacific Gas and Electric, the owner of Diablo Canyon, made gross changes in all of the assumptions in order to get Diablo Canyon qualified to a much larger earthquake. The argument should have been made in 1980, and now Friends of the Earth is taking the argument forward in 35 years later.
Does the NRC have to respond? Do you expect them to?
I expect that they will. I don't know if they're on a clock. When the public finds a problem, we have to notify the NRC within 30 days or else we lose our right to complain. But when the NRC finds a problem, they can drag their feet for years. So I'm not sure when the NRC will respond, and I'm not optimistic that it'll be very quickly. Let's hope we can avoid an earthquake in the meantime.
Yeah, well, that's what the Japanese are hoping, too, with their volcanoes. Well, now this super dangerous San Onofre nuclear plant in California was finally shut down, maybe because the operator couldn't afford a third refit to fix that damaged piping and equipment. Is there any chance the operators of Diablo Canyon will finally shut it down? What could make it happen?
They should shut it down because it's not safe. Unfortunately, if we have to wait until the big one comes and then wipe out the corridor between L.A. and San Francisco. Diablo Canyon is south of San Francisco, but north of L.A. on the coast. What could make it happen?
Is this the way they end for me here in this place? A mental hospital, they call it. That's a fancy name, that is, but I know a better. The Bug House. A place where they lock you up and then throw away the key. And now they've got me, too. Me, Fred Clanton. Fred Clanton, Fred Clanton. Is that really my name? Oh, everything's so mixed up. These grounds, these buildings, they're all so dark. Everything's dark, even the sky. I'll never get out. That George, he's turned them all against me. Even Betty. They keep talking about me. Why won't they let me alone? Oh my God. Oh no, don't let them take me in there. I'll never get out. Oh God, what will happen to me now?
now. What happens to all of them? The men and women from every walk of life who each year pass through doors like this into the mental hospitals of our land. Here, in the story of Fred Clanton and the typical Oklahoma State Hospital to which he came, the spotlight focuses on these people. Patients are old, and often theirs is a tragedy of hospitals such as this. The tragedy of fathers and mothers too old to work, rejected by their own children, classed as senile and committed to mental hospitals because there's nowhere else for them to go. Yet, given proper care, they can still adjust, make new friends to ease the passing of years. Some patients are disturbed, unable to care for themselves in normal life situations. Others are physically as well as mentally ill. Many are capable of limited adjustment, able to work at varied tasks within the hospital. There's the veteran returned from years of service overseas. The farmer who had never set foot outside his home county till he came here. Deterioration, chronic conditions limit hope for some. Others may go home tomorrow. Meanwhile, they're living here. 3,200 men and women all gathered together in a modern mental institution, a city in itself, complete with every facility for effective treatment. Though shortages in hospital personnel do exist, patients are secure and comfortable, and most of them are happy. For while mere custodial care can never be enough, a favorable environment and human comforts are essential in any therapeutic system. For most, meals are served cafeteria style. Food is plentiful and good, an investment in patient health. Just baking the bread for 3,000 people is a man-sized job. Above all, though, these kitchen chores offer patients work, the therapy of busy hands. The laundry, more chances for patients to focus on specific realities outside themselves. First step along the road that leads to recovery and release. The patients tell you the power plant smokestack is 525 feet tall. They seem to take a personal pride in it, maybe because power is so important here. The sick must have heat and light, there's water to be pumped, and food cooked, and laundry washed. Patients must be housed, and today's new hospital buildings center on human needs and comfort. Whether they provide living quarters or treatment facilities, whether they're for convalescents, older people, the tubercular, veterans, or occupational therapy, these modern structures are part of a long-range integrated plan to improve conditions for all who live within these grounds. Special units provide homes for nurses and attendants, for they too play a vital role in helping patients to regain health. In addition to the regular staff, student nurses come here to learn to recognize and care for the mentally ill. There are lakes for fishing. The hospital farm cuts operating costs, provides fresh truck and dairy products, and the familiar scenes, the work, help make patients from rural areas feel at home. They come from all sorts of homes, these patients, all kinds of backgrounds. But somewhere along the line, life became too much for them. Some apply for voluntary admission to the hospital, one of the 3 procedures by which residents may enter a state mental institution in Oklahoma. Many former patients return of their own free will when new troubles assail them. All applicants for voluntary admission are held a minimum of 15 days for examination before they may be released. Other patients are certified for admission by 2 competent medical examiners. This is the second method by which patients enter the hospital under the terms of Oklahoma's mental health law. The majority, however, come by court order, committed either by a judge or a 6-man jury. This was the case with Fred Clanton.
Fred Clanton? Oh, yes. How are you, Fred?
Well, I'd be all right if they just left me alone.
Well, why don't you tell me about it?
You can't fool me. I know you're in with them, too.
Fred, I'm going to send you to the hospital. And if you will cooperate with those doctors, I think they'll be able to do you some good.
The admitting clerk records Fred's case history as soon as he enters the hospital. Takes care of valuables until he is sufficiently improved to be trusted with them. Escorted to the receiving ward by an attendant, he's bathed and outfitted. He gets a blood test, part of the medical examination given each patient on admission. There's a chest x-ray also, and a spinal fluid test. Finally comes a neuropsychiatric check, designed to bring out data related to the patient's mental disorder.
They're turning my wife, you know, Betty, against me. They're taking up all her time.
Why do you think they're doing you this way?
Well, I've been working on this for years. They don't know it, but I'm on to them. You see, if they can just get Betty to team up with them, then they'll all try to get together.
A clinical psychologist gives Fred a variety of specialized tests in order to make possible a more accurate evaluation of his total personality. Following the examination and testing, an informal meeting of the hospital staff arrives at a tentative diagnosis of schizophrenia, paranoid type. Fred benefits from the skill and experience of all members of the staff, as well as the psychiatrist to whose care he is assigned. Diagnosis and staff approval completed, the patient is transferred to a treatment ward for therapy. In Fred's case, insulin shock is prescribed, a common treatment for schizophrenia. Electroshock therapy may be recommended for other disorders. Hydrotherapy is useful in calming disturbed patients. So are sedative packs. But whatever the mode of treatment, it's essential that it be supplemented by an atmosphere of security and calm. The effective hospital must always serve as a refuge for its patients, a place where they can live quietly during that period of reorientation in which they learn how to achieve a better adjustment to the world outside. Degree of adjustment, the level of orientation, varies sharply from patient to patient. Some show a complete loss of contact with reality, dark shadows across disordered minds. In other wards are light and life, a return from private worlds to the here and now. As patients improve, they are moved to wards in keeping with their condition. They're given the opportunity for contact with others who are also getting better, shown that their status as individuals is recognized, that no matter what their problem, there still is hope. In Fred's case, insulin therapy brought relatively quick improvement. Close linked with it, helping further, was personal follow-up attention by the psychiatrist directing his treatment and care. Occupational therapy, reinforced shock treatment, helped Fred to draw away from his feelings of antagonism and suspicion and move closer to reality. Boredom is always an enemy of the mentally ill. Now improving, Fred begins to take increasing interest in the wide variety of recreational facilities. Patients enjoy movies just as much as anyone. And a hot game of dominoes or pool or ping pong is always fun. The sewing room's popular, and a permanent wave may serve as a milestone of self-respect for many women in spite of the bubble gum. Books mean so much to so many. Improvement brings added privileges, a more normal life. What could be better than an afternoon softball game? Friday dances give Fred a chance for contact with women on a social plane, help to spark his dormant pride. Religious services in the chapel offer inspiration. Then there's the happy day when Fred is granted grounds privileges.
Fine, Doctor. As a matter of fact, I feel like going back to work.
Well, you'll have to stay around the hospital for a few days. Maybe we can find you something to do here.
Oh.
How would you like to help us out around the hospital here?
I don't know whether there's much I can do or not.
We have quite a few jobs that you might do.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you might work up at the dairy, you might help out in the garden, or you might work over in the cafeteria, or we might even be able to get you on the ground crew.
Ground crew?
Yes, sir.
I'd like that a lot, I really would.
Well, that's swell. You just report out there in the morning and everything will be all right.
In the morning?
Yes, sir.
What a difference it makes. At last, Fred can be outside once more, working, enjoying the sun and the seasons. There are the days when visitors come, the chance to talk again with Betty. And George comes too. And now, somehow, he doesn't seem quite as bad as he did before. It's not too long till the psychiatrist decides that Fred can try it for a while at home. He talks with Betty and with George, helps them to understand that they too have vital roles to play in aiding Fred to adjust successfully to the world outside. Then the words pass to the switchboard to call Fred in. How well he looks. A cigarette from the doctor. And Fred's hand is steady. Packing at last. A man can be proud of the things he's created with his own two hands, and a hospital can be proud too. Proud to see a patient face the world as a man again.
So this is it. Today I'm going home. 6 months it's taken. If I'd come here sooner, I might have been out in 3. But all I could think about was fear. The way everyone was all against me. How much I hated George. How wrong I was. Or no, not wrong. Sick. And now that I'm well again, I can't help feeling just a little sad. The way you always do when you leave a place where you've lived, learned, and grown. But I am well, and I know it. I'm able to face the world again. My own hometown. I suppose there'll be some folks who'll stare and talk and sneer. But no matter what they say or do, one thing I know. These people here, this place and time, have given my life back to me.
Sable Island, it's about 40 kilometers long, pretty much the length of Manhattan, more or less. It's very narrow, it's about the width of Central Park. Now, there are about 300 horses on Sable Island, so imagine Manhattan with 300 people. To find those 300 people in Manhattan would be something. The origins of the horses are multiple. They come partly from shipwrecks, some of them being brought from the mainland. It's a mixture of so many different breeds. And the horses, as they exist, they do not have a specific name or of a specific breed other than just the sable horses. Many of the horses that I photographed in '94 or '97 will no longer be there. What I'm very curious to see is how will they react towards me now, because I very much remember the way they were reacting towards me and how curious they were seeing a man walking on their territory. I've always used a lot of film. Perhaps that comes from fashion. Always looking for the perfect shot, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm very curious, of course, to go much further towards the extreme of the island. The more you're out there, the more chances that some beautiful moments will be in front of the lens. Beautiful moments happen all the time, all over the island. I can only be in one place at a time. Sable Island's a very primitive place. And if you go there with a keen eye to explore and to just, not intrude, but just observe, then that primitive beauty will display itself in just incredible ways. In general, in a natural habitat, I've learned that if you give respect to what's in front of you, that respect will always be returned. The photographs, they are gifts that are being offered on a plate. And I think that those gifts, on some occasions, are being offered just to you. You can, of course, choose to take advantage of those moments, or you can just experience that moment for your own self.
Sarah, just take out any card that you'd like. This may not work. Now, let's say your card were the ace of clubs. If it were, and then if I put it into the deck, and then I shuffled the deck up, and I told you to look over under the ashtray, and the card was underneath the ashtray, you'd look at me and say, well, that was a pretty good trick. My card can't go from here to there. Wouldn't you assume that that was a duplicate card? Well, that's where this magic marker comes in. Sarah, just take out any card that you'd like. Coming in?
I can see it.
Now listen to these instructions very carefully. This may not work. On the face of your card, not the back, but the face. Not your face. Now let's say your card were the ace of clubs. Just make a little and then if I put it into the deck, and then I shuffled the deck up, and I told you to look over under the ashtray, and the card was underneath the ashtray, you'd look at me and say, well, that was a pretty good trick. My card can't go from here to there. And I don't want to look, so assume that that was a duplicate card at the table. Well, that's where this magic marker comes in. You always wear those? See it coming in? Now, you will know that card when you see it again. You got now listen to these instructions very carefully. Did you see on the face of your card, not the back, but the face. Not your face, the face of your card. That just make a little X or write your name or draw a guy behind you pulling a string. Later on, when you see that card someplace else, you may want to show it to the camera one last time. You'll know that I'm not using duplicates at all, and I don't want to look. So let me go under the table. Okay, just go ahead and mark. Do you always wear those? How many damn cans? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, you will know that card when you see it. Okay. You got a hunk of hair hanging right now. I've shuffled the deck there in front of you, and as of right now, from this point on, I will not touch the deck at all, I promise. Same number out loud between 1 and 52. Is there a guy behind you pulling a string? 38. Now, put your, you may want to show it to the camera one last time. I think the one right there, okay? And then put your card right in. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to pick the deck up and count down 37 cards and then turn the 38th card face up. And when you see that it's your card, you're absolutely going to freak out. Now, I've shuffled the deck there in front of you, and as of right now, from this point on, I will not touch the deck. And then you're going to look at me. One woman looked at me one night, and she's between 1 and 52.
38.
Oh, Jesus, I wish I
38.
said 11. There's no damn way that trick would have worked if
now,
I had
in a minute, I'm going to ask you to pick the deck up and count down 37 cards and then turn the 38th card face up. And when you see that it's your card, you're absolutely going to freak out. So will that guy up there, but it'll be hard to tell. So if you want to change your mind, and then you're going to look at me. One woman looked at me one night and she said, would you like a cigarette also? You don't smoke.
Oh, Jesus, I wish I said 11. There's no damn way that trick would have worked if I had said 11. Oh, Jesus, I wish I said
11. So if you want to change your mind, would you like a cigarette also? You don't smoke. Now, you can change your mind if you want to. You don't want to change. Now, you can change your mind if you want to. You don't want to change. Is it getting hotter in here to you? in here to you? Do you mind if I smoke? Not how, why. Do you mind if I smoke? So 11's your final decision? Not how, why. You know why I eat those napkins? You don't have to buy toilet paper. So 11's your final decision? You know why I eat those napkins? You don't have to buy toilet paper. Now, is 38 your final decision? Thank you. And then you said 11, and then you don't want to change your mind. The trick will work better if you say 11, but you don't want to say 11. Now, this is your last chance. When you see your card, the show's over, the trick's over, and when you're driving home tonight, I don't want you to be going. If you want to say 11, do it now. Thank you. 11, 38. Did you already signed? And then you said 11, and then this is going to kill you. Change your mind. The trick will work better if you say 11. But you don't want to say 11. Now, this is your last chance. When you see your card, the show's over, the trick's over, and when you're driving home tonight, I don't want you to be going.
Oh, geez, I wish I said 11.
If you want to say 11, do it now. Oops, or forever hold your peace. 11, 38.
38.
38, count down, and there it is. This is going to kill you. Don't you wish you'd picked 11?